Hello, everybody. This
Hello.
is uh, this is Apple Treats. Yeah. Hello, Chris. Hello, Irina. We have really great guest today. We were actually waiting for this for some time, and we were able to fit the schedule. And today's episode will be obviously on Swift and maybe some other Swift related topics. Welcome, Chris. We are really proud. We're really happy you were able to get to us. And
Yeah, thanks for having me. Likewise.
So thanks for coming again, and let's start from the beginning. How did you get into development? What's your story?
I was always fascinated by computers. We never really had like a modern one, but I think when I was 13 maybe or 12, my parents got a fairly modern computer, and I don't know, like I couldn't help it. I just had to figure it out. This was, I think, um, before even Windows 95. I remember going through all the folders on the entire hard drive, seeing what was there, just exploring. And I slowly started getting into programming. A friend made a script that could change the wallpaper on boot, and that's sort of what got me started. I found that fascinating that you could control these machines, and um, yeah, I had a really hard time understanding everything because everything was in English, and that was very difficult for me. And when I turned, like, I don't know, 18 or 16, and when I learned some more English in school, I also learned that I'd been pronouncing every single word wrong. But I figured it out somehow, and yeah, that's how I got started. And then sort of got into building websites, and at some point the iPhone came out, and I started looking into that. It's hard for me to not be programming. Like, I mean, I do a lot of other stuff, and nowadays with a family, it's a lot less time, but it's still something I always want to do. I need to do almost, and yeah, it's just something I have to do, and I really enjoy.
right, and well, probably most people know you for obj.io and Swift Talk. Can you share a little bit about how it's get to life? Like, what's the story behind the obj.io?
Yeah, absolutely. So at some point, I moved to Berlin, and I wanted to go to an iOS conference, and there were no English speaking iOS conferences in Berlin. So I figured I will organize one. So that was UIConf. I started that, but now it's in much better hands. But in the first year, we sort of started it, and all kinds of people and all kinds of interesting people came to Berlin to speak and to attend. And it was really amazing. Like, there were all these people who'd never met before, and of course some had known each other, but so many new friendships um, and like work relationships and all kinds of other stuff happened there. And one of the things that happened is that after the conference, I sat down. There was a hack day. I was too tired from all the organizing to really hack. So I just sat down with Florian and Daniel and Peter Steinberger. And Florian and Daniel and me decided to start a blog. And after uh, a few more weeks, I convinced them, let's not do a blog, but a magazine, because that was hip at the time. And everything sort of came together. We had this uh, really great copy editor, Natalie, who's still working with us today. And she's been amazing, and made really it made a big difference, right? Like, if you write an article, especially as a non-native speaker, if there's somebody looking over your work and making sure it's understandable and readable and even grammatically correct and all of that. And we had Jurian, who is a designer, who made this beautiful design for the first issue, and it sort of um, came out at the right time. It was mostly a lot of luck and a little bit of work, and um, yeah, and we noticed immediately that people were really waiting for this kind of stuff, like in-depth, long articles, and that's what we started with. And after the first issue, we just had to continue. Like, there were these expectations, and because we called it issue one, people were expecting many more issues, so we just had to do it. It was definitely a struggle at some times, but a lot of fun.
And would you say that video format now is winning than articles?
I don't know. I think it really depends. And it depends on the person, and maybe also even on the phase in your life and on what you're trying to learn, or what you're trying to teach. So if I want to learn how to repair my bike, I'd much rather watch a video on YouTube than read a book about it. But for other topics, it's much better to just first read a book and then experiment yourself. There's nothing. I don't believe you can learn anything really just from reading a book. I think with almost everything you have to really practice and put in the time yourself. But sometimes it can really help to watch other people do it. So one of my hobbies is woodworking. I don't have a lot of time for it, and I want to do it more. But I do notice that just by looking at a lot of YouTube videos of people building stuff, I learned so much, and it's that's what sort of the idea with SwiftTalk as well, where we try to do pair programming and build stuff, and so that other people can watch how we build stuff. It's not the best way, it's not the only way, it's just one way how people can work together and get something done. And I hope like people can learn something from that, or maybe be entertained by it. I don't think videos are the only way. We're actually today working on our book Advanced Swift and updating that for the latest Swift version. And a lot of people also really enjoy reading books. And other people want to do like workshops, for example. And other people just, to learn something, they need to spend time by themselves learning something, and other people just need to get a job done and sort of learn that way because they have to use this one framework and they figure it out, and that's the only way for them to learn. And everybody's very different, so I think there are so many opportunities, and I don't think videos are the end either. I think we'll see more different kinds of learning probably in the future. People are experimenting with that, but in a programming scene, I think I forgot the name, but there's somebody called Gary Bernhardt. He teaches a lot of JavaScript and also TypeScript and these kinds of things. And he has this super cool online course where you learn, I think, TypeScript, and it also uses this where you have like exercises, and then if you know something, or if you don't know something, you get like repetition and all kinds of cool stuff around that. So there's so many. It's an exciting space, and there's so many ways to learn. And videos are just one small part of it.
Okay, and you have now a series of videos to re-implement SwiftUI. How far are you going to go with it? With re-implementing?
I don't think we'll re-implement SwiftUI. And what we did is more like an educational re-implementation. So it's more about, we try to exactly have the semantics of SwiftUI, but we, for example, don't care at all about performance. So our goal originally was to just understand SwiftUI better. So I felt like I understand it fairly well, or understood it fairly well, and then I started looking into some of the edge cases, and I noticed like, okay, something isn't like, my mental model of SwiftUI is broken because it does something that I did not expect. And then as I tried more and more, I understood more and more, and my mental model was closer to the reality, I think, because I mean, I've never seen the source code. But then at some point I was like, well, let's just try to re-implement it and see how far we can get, and see why some edge cases are there. And it turns out that there's some weird behavior that's perfectly explainable if you just look at the code. If you explain, or if you implement things in a naive, or maybe not even so naive way, you just get this emerging behavior that's looks kind of weird but makes total sense. So what we did is first we looked at the layout, because I think the layout is like this not super well understood part of SwiftUI. Like the way SwiftUI does layout is very different from UIKit, for example, because there's like a phase where SwiftUI proposes a size, and a view then can propose sizes to its children, or it can accept that proposed size. And some views compute their size based on their children. Other views just do something completely different. And we try to figure this out for every view modifier. And it was super interesting because we learned a lot more than we expected. And then at some point we wanted to do the same thing for state and for like these new APIs like match geometry effect. Well, I guess it's not so new anymore, but was new last year. And yeah, the one thing I would really like to understand better is animations and transitions. I think I understand them, but sometimes they still surprise me. And I think by re-implementing it, I can take away that surprise. And ideally, we would do it on SwiftTalk, because then other people can also learn from how things work. And we got a lot of really fun feedback, and we even noticed that some of the things changed, and we made some mistakes, of course. And yeah, it's very interesting. It's definitely something I can recommend to do, and it's not super hard. You just need time.
Yeah. And by the way, for those who are listening or watching us live, you can ask questions. We will try to answer them and pass them to Chris, and hopefully he will be able to give you some advices here. So I have one actually. So from your perspective, what is the most complicated or maybe unintuitive thing in SwiftUI?
Yeah, I think one thing that, well, the layout is something, for example, that if you look at the examples on Apple's website, everything is super simple. And people start working with it and everything just works. And then at some point, it doesn't. And that can be super unintuitive, because everything seemed to work just as like you expect. Like you have like some text and you do some padding and a border and everything works. And then you need to do something that's not in the design of SwiftUI, and all of a sudden, like you have to sort of enter this rabbit hole. Like everybody who's done more than a little bit of SwiftUI will notice. Like you need a geometry reader, you need preferences, you need on preference change, and it's like all of a sudden things become super complicated. So there's like this very easy learning curve. It's like it's basically flat, and then all of a sudden there's like this vertical wall that you have to climb. I think that's and yeah, I would say that's one of the hardest parts. Also, a lot of people struggle with the declarativeness, and yeah, I think to really work effectively with SwiftUI, you have to really understand how it's working almost. Not how it's implemented, but you have to understand a lot. But you can get started without understanding anything, and you can get stuff done quickly. And sort of making that or bridging that gap is not always easy. So you really have to go out of your comfort zone, and there's not a lot of great documentation around this, at least not from Apple, in crossing that gap.
Well, they actually do more documentation for the SwiftUI than they were doing like previously. It's like significant change, but probably not enough.
No, yeah, it's the tutorials are amazing, but a lot of the what's sort of missing is a lot of the conceptual documentation. Why is it like this? How is this supposed to work? And the community, we figured it out, but I think a lot of that stuff should have come from the source, basically. But
right,
there is one really great talk called "Demystifying SwiftUI" at last year's WWDC, and that really clears up a lot. But I would love to see more stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you like? You already have like good understanding of the SwiftUI. I mean, like being able to re-implement the layout system. That's probably one of the hardest thing. Like it works perfectly in simple cases, like you understand and it works. But when you try to get into edge cases, you sometimes need to shift your mindset, probably. Yeah. So your videos, by the way, were like amazingly helpful in terms of getting more to like these passes of the layout and everything. But like if you were on the SwiftUI team, would you propose to change something, maybe like even fundamentally? Like, do you have something in mind which would like to change in SwiftUI?
Yeah, probably. But I don't know if it's such a good idea. Like I don't have anything concrete in mind, but I remember when Apple came, like when we were all doing Objective-C, and I was really hoping that Apple would come out with something like maybe something more like Smalltalk. And then they came out with Swift, which completely blew me away. And it was so much better than I could have imagined. And I think it's the same with SwiftUI. Like I can absolutely see some improvements. Like, for example, one of the things that's hard to do today is if you want to have 4 buttons with different texts and you want to all make them as wide as the widest text. That's super hard. You need geometry readers and preferences and everything. And I have some solutions for how you could make that easier. But what I noticed over the years is that if I just wait, at some point, the engineers at Apple will come out with something that's much better than what I could have imagined. And I think that's like, yeah. So I'm very humbled. Like I can write about what they do and I can re-implement it, but I even think I have good solutions for some of the problems that people have, but typically Apple comes up with much better solutions than I could think of, and I like that. Like it's I'm happy that the smart people there do their job and I do mine. And it's been the same for me with sometimes with building apps. I don't know if you ever had that where you're building something and I had that with DexSet, for example, this Mac app that we built. We were working with designers, and I have a feeling about design and I have thoughts on it, but they just came back with these ideas and designs that just blew me away. Like it was much better than I could even think. Like it was so much further out there than what I could imagine. And it's I really like it when you have that kind of stuff in work where where people just amaze you.
I would actually want Apple to give us a guide in terms of how to make proper navigation through the iOS applications on the SwiftUI, or probably macOS as well. But they have like navigation link or everything, but there should be a way of making the navigation in a proper way. There should be some example like showing like this is the intended way. And I believe it seems that they might also need to like find it or maybe invent in next release. I mean, it seems that they do not have something like that in mind right now.
I'm not sure. I don't know exactly how it works, but I also wish it was simpler and better understood. Yeah.
And what about changes in Swift in general? So Swift usually uses runtime features of Objective-C. How do you think does it need its own features runtime?
I think so. A lot of the stuff is slowly going away, right? Like, for example, key paths were this Objective-C only feature where you basically had a string, and now Swift has its own key path since Swift 4, and it's slowly changing. Like introspection is not really quite there yet. If you want to have, let's say, if you want to work with core data, you have to subclass NS managed object, and that uses all the runtime programming, and the same with NS sort descriptor. And even today, there's this new thing, I think, in the latest Swift or in the latest foundation, where there's sort descriptor without the NS, and it uses normal Swift key paths, but it only works for objects. You can only sort objects and not sort structs in an array, for example. So Swift definitely needs its own story. And sometimes the answer is runtime programming. Like in Swift, we have mirror, where you can introspect some types. And often the answer can be also something completely different. Like when we wrote the book Advanced Swift, my co-author Ben came up with this idea to create sort descriptors just using functions. So NS sort descriptor and the foundation sort descriptor heavily rely on runtime programming. And Ben wrote this implementation where it's all functions that compose and all just generic types. And that can also be a solution sometimes. And I think it's much nicer, but that is also because it fits my kind of style of thinking. Runtime programming is something that a lot of people also really enjoy. So I guess the short answer is yes, Swift does need some more runtime features because some things are impossible to do without that. But also sometimes there are different solutions, and we don't need to use runtime programming, but we can use things like key paths and functions and generics and protocols. So it's hard to answer in general. Yeah.
Yeah. You're witnessing like the growth of Swift, probably from the first announcement and how it evolves. Do you think that Swift, first of all, should it be like universal language for all platforms outside the Apple ecosystem? And if so, what do we need to make it so? I mean, like we still see, like for example, even the Kotlin, which is like language for the Java world, it tries to get like outside with Kotlin native and everything. And do you think like Swift should be in the same place? And like what do we need to make it so?
It would be really cool. I don't know if it happens. I think still Swift is probably perceived by many people outside of the Apple ecosystem as being an Apple thing, and people might not want that. Like people might not even realize that it runs on Linux, or that it runs fairly well on Linux even. But yeah, it's hard. I think Apple is putting in some effort, but it's also clear that they have a lot of other priorities, and so that means that the community needs to step up, and there have been some individuals who have been doing amazing stuff, like the Tokamak UI, where Max Desiatov ported SwiftUI to the web, and all the WebAssembly stuff. There, I forgot the name. There's somebody who ported Swift to Windows, but this is mostly individuals, or maybe, I don't know, maybe some of these are sponsored by companies, and some of the community stuff, but there's no big companies that have a stake in getting SwiftUI to be cross-platform. There used to be IBM, of course, but they sort of pulled out. So it's kind of tough. Like for Swift developers, it's really nice that we can also run our code on other platforms. We, for example, rewrote our SwiftTalk backend in Swift, and it runs on Linux, on Heroku, and it's completely painless. It's really nice to have all that code in Swift. And we were inspired by the people from Point Free who did that for their server. And yeah, it's really cool that it works. There were some strange bugs in Swift for Linux, and some of them have not been fixed for years. But you can work your way around it, and it's fine. But it's not something like I don't know if I would recommend it to people who are not also invested in the Apple ecosystem. Like for me, it's just another, like if I want to deploy a server somewhere, and it's hard, right? Like because you can write the code, maybe you write like a server in Ruby, but then you have to maintain it, and you have to keep on top of all the dependencies and all the stuff, and on the language, and if stuff changes, and if there's security updates. It's the same with Swift, but I'm already inside the Swift ecosystem, so it's much easier for me to deal with that than dealing with like a second language. So yeah, I would love to see more Swift out there. I tried to run Swift on my Raspberry Pi, and it sort of worked, but then other things broke. It's kind of, yeah, who knows? Maybe now that the MacBooks are starting to move to ARM, and maybe all the other computers as well, things will be a little bit easier, but we'll see. I think, yeah, it's so that one of the other things is that Swift is so coupled to Foundation, and while there is core Foundation, the reimplementation or the open source reimplementation, a lot of that stuff is not very polished yet and not as battle tested as the real Foundation. So I don't know. We'll see. It's if there's one thing I'm good at, it's no, if there's one thing I'm bad at, it's predicting the future. So I don't want to make any predictions about what's going to happen around that, because I know I'm pretty bad at that. Yeah.
Well, we have one question from the audience, and that was sent to us. So, if you were able to, what kind of what part of SwiftUI source code you would like to see, how, like the implementation details? Is there something which you would like for your personal experience?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, I've spent the most time on re-implementing the layout system, so I would love to see how that actually works, and especially the implementation of stacks, and also the implementation of flexible frames. I managed to like, as far as I know, there are no differences in behavior between our implementation and SwiftUI, but it's kind of a weird implementation that we have, and I'm sure there's a good reason for why it works the way it does. So I would love to see that. Who knows, one day.
Right.
So you described your vision of how Swift can displace or can displace other languages, but on other platforms. But how do you think can some cross-platform technology displace native, like Kotlin multi-platform or React Native or Flutter? Can it win?
Yeah, I think it can win. I don't see it happening, but who knows, right? Like, if people have a big advantage when they use React, I think it can totally blow away native apps. But that said, people have been saying this for years and it never happens. I don't, like, I'm skeptical that it will happen, but it's not hard to prove me wrong. Like, if people do it and make it work, then why not? There's still a lot of opportunities there. I do think that the way SwiftUI, like the whole system around SwiftUI is, it's just really good. There's all the type safety. It's very little code that you write. And the way, like the declarative nature of SwiftUI makes it really hard to make certain kind of bugs that were much harder or much easier to make before, like in UIKit. If you compare SwiftUI to something like React Native, I think the types really help. And I know there's TypeScript, but still, like, there's a lot of safety and there's a lot of performance that's much harder to get with a dynamic language like JavaScript and its variants. And so I'm pretty positive about native apps staying there. But what's it called? I think Figma, right? That's all a web app, and that's supposedly super well done. And what I heard about it, I don't know really, but what I heard about it is that it takes as much time as writing a native app to write a really good cross-platform app or web app. So I think that's sort of the key. I think everything is possible, but probably it's just easier to do native apps if you want to do it really well. If you want to get something out quickly, probably cross-platform apps can help, or cross-platform technologies can help, but it's probably harder to make something really good. And I don't think it's impossible at all, but yeah. For me, I've just been focusing on Swift and SwiftUI, and I see a very bright future there, but who knows what will happen.
Yeah.
You told about safety, but do you miss this extreme unsafe behavior of Objective-C? Do you have any nostalgia?
No, I don't miss it at all. So what happened with me personally is I was in university, and I was studying functional programming and specifically Haskell, which is like the opposite of Objective-C. It's super typed and everything is safe, basically almost everything. And then I was making money writing Objective-C, and it was a little bit hard for me at times. Like at sometimes I was writing Objective-C and I felt sort of like I had seen the light with Haskell, and then I had to write Objective-C, but I love the platform and writing apps for my phone. So I always wished Objective-C was a little bit more towards Haskell, and I never could even dream of something like Swift, that it would be like that you could have both, basically. No, I don't miss that at all. And with Swift, it is actually possible to do a lot of low-level stuff, like we like wrapping C libraries. Like it's kind of cool. Like there's these really amazing C libraries out there, for example, for parsing Markdown, or for parsing XML, or whatever, like data processing. And with just a little bit of work, you can wrap it in Swift, and you can add a tiny type-safe API around it, and then all of a sudden you have the best of both worlds. Like you have this battle-tested low-level code, and you have a beautiful type-safe API. And I think that's just really cool. So no, I don't miss Objective-C at all. The only thing I miss is when I do fire up, like open up an old Objective-C project. It's just you press Command R and you just blink and it's built. That was nice. I wish, maybe in 10 years, I'll keep dreaming.
Do you think you might change the domain name of your site? I mean, like you still have Objective-C there, and like probably for a long time.
Yeah, I don't know. So Swift.io was immediately taken after the announcement. And we thought of it. I don't know. I guess Swift Talk is already like a little bit more its own brand. But I've definitely heard of people who did not want to buy our book. Like people told me that other people did not want to buy our book because it was a book about Swift, and the first word on the cover says Objective-C. So it's kind of, it's, it's
right.
I guess it's okay. I don't know. Yeah. It's hard to change a name. If you have a good suggestion, let me know.
Yeah, well, and by the way, that brand is already there. I mean, we all know that the Swift Talk is there specifically.
Yes, exactly.
And, I have one more question on Swift, actually, and that comes from recent discussions on Twitter. There is some talks about the distributed actor concept, which is pitching right now, and one of the motivation behind that this might change the way how we write Swift code. So it might change the like look and feel of the apps, even if you're not using the distributed part of that. But it seems that it might still have some effect on that. From your perspective, will it? I mean, like, is it something really that important?
Maybe, yeah. It's hard to say. I think so. I guess Erlang was one of the first languages that really did this well, and it just opens up a whole different set of possibilities of what you can do with a language. And I'm kind of curious if there's like a bigger reason behind this, because in before Swift came out, like all of a sudden some new features started coming to Objective-C, and likewise before SwiftUI came out, new features started coming to Swift, and then Swift came out and it was like SwiftUI came out, and everybody was like, now we see why this is there. And I wonder if there's something like that behind the distributed actors, or maybe not. I have absolutely no information. Like, I could imagine like with a lot more cores, or maybe there's a future where we have just multiple machines or lots of machines everywhere. Maybe Apple will at some point come up with a story where you have something like iCloud but programmable, where you can upload Swift containers, sort of like Docker or whatever, and then this could become more important. It's kind of hard to say, but and also I don't really understand it yet. I browsed through the proposal for distributed actors, but it'll take more than just a light reading to understand it.
Yeah.
The one thing I do believe is that async await is going to make a huge difference in how we write Swift code. I've been playing around with it, and I think it's beautiful. Like async await and also async sequences are really cool. And I absolutely believe that in a few years, a lot of the code we write now will feel super outdated because of async await. Like it can simplify a lot of things, and at the same time it's tricky. Like with async await and with actors, there are definitely some behaviors that really surprised me, and that I am pretty sure will surprise a lot of people. But we'll see what will happen. Maybe I'm wrong. I do think it's going to change a lot. So that's the one part I'm really excited about. And it's the same people, the same group of people who are also doing the distributed actors stuff, I think. So it's probably it's going to be really cool. But let's see how we can use it.
Right.
Yeah.
That's some interesting happening there. And even from the actors, there are a lot of discussions that the actor concept is probably not for the like UI facing applications. It's something like more related to the like safe server programming, something like that. And like it's not to make sure that you will be running code on the main thread. That's like probably there's something more behind the actors rather than like using the main actor for your UI classes. So probably that might be something about that. So well, there is a question again from our team. You write books, you do educational videos. So what inspires you to do that? So what's why?
Yeah, it's actually let's go back to when Swift came out. So this is, for me personally, we'd been doing Objective-C.io, the magazine, for a while, just for fun. And then Swift came out, and I realized that you could do all this functional programming all of a sudden. And in Objective-C, it wasn't really possible, at least not with the type safety and everything, and with the nice short code. So I got really excited, and I managed to convince Florian, who was doing Objective-C.io with me, and also Wouter, who is this functional programming professor at Utrecht University. And I was like, we need to tell people about this. Like, it's so cool. And that was my biggest motivation. And then it turned out that you can actually make a little bit of money with the book. Like, I think if I would have a job, I would probably make more money, but I really enjoy it. Like, I make enough money to live off of doing Objective-C.io. And it's just so much fun. Like, with SwiftUI, it was the same. At first it was like this weird thing, and I started exploring it and realized, okay, we need to really rethink the way we write apps because it's so different from UIKit. So as we explored more and more, we realized like we need to tell people about this. Like, there's a lot of cool stuff, and at the same time, this is basically undocumented. So we need to tell people about how this works and how they can write cool stuff with this. And it's sort of a mix of excitement. Yeah, well, it's mostly excitement. There are a lot of books I could write potentially. Like, I have so many ideas, but we basically have the luxury that we can choose what is the most exciting to us, and write about that. And yeah, that's sort of the motivation for me. And if I ever feel like I don't want to write about something, I won't. Like, it's not, I don't feel like I have to do this, or it's just that I want to share the cool stuff with people. Yeah. And it's sort of self-reinforcing because once you get into that, like, you have the time to explore deeper. And so most people just need to write their apps and they need to get it done, and then they have a bug and they need to fix it. And I have the luxury that if there's something in SwiftUI that I don't understand, I don't need to fix it or find a workaround. I can actually take the time and explore it, and it's so cool. Like, I really enjoy that. Like, with the layout, like, who has the time to re-implement the layout system? Like, I'm so happy that I get that time, get to work on that, and yeah. So it's sort of I learn about the layout system, and then I see all these interesting edge cases, and I just want to tell people about it, like how this works, and so that they don't have to go through that same pain of learning all of that. Or I guess it's not just pain, it's mostly a lot of fun, but it's painful when you're actually trying to solve bugs. So yeah, that's sort of my motivation.
So it's very nice motivation that you just want to share knowledge with people and you enjoy it. And you already were reasoning today that a learning curve is not linear. Usually it's like with the gaps, and when you're trying to learn something and understand, it goes not linear. But maybe you can recommend something to beginners who want to start with iOS development, what to start with to make like the angle of their curve more like higher.
Yeah.
Do they need to learn some Objective-C that you don't miss at all?
I think so I cannot speak for all beginners, but for me, the way I learn best is just by having sort of something I want to make and then figuring out how to do it. So instead of, like, I never had the ambition necessarily to be an iOS developer. I just wanted to write an app, and then another app, and then another app, and then all of a sudden I was an iOS developer. And I think that could be one way to learn. So just speaking to like a younger version of me, I would say just, try to figure out what you want to build, and then you'll notice that there's like a huge gap probably in your knowledge of what you like. You know what you want, but you have no idea how to do it. And what I did first was read very broadly. So try to read all kinds of blogs and articles and Stack Overflow and what have you, and see if there's anything that sort of keeps repeating. Like if you, in UIKit days, for example, you would see the word view controller everywhere. So I would try to figure out what is a view controller. And then there are a lot of blogs that are sort of aimed at beginners, and they're really easy to find. Most of them have really good SEO, and you can do stuff from there. And then there's these days like, or these things like 100 Days of SwiftUI, I think, by Paul Hudson. Like that's also a great way to learn if your goal is just learning. But for me, I always found it best to have like an actual sort of product that I want to make in mind, even if it's just an app for myself, or if it's a Mac app or like a command line tool. If there's something I want to make, I'll see if I can figure out a way to build it. And of course, if you're a beginner, it's hard to judge whether your idea is even realistic at all, because you might want to make something where you need to end up implementing complete artificial intelligence. But it's very hard, like to judge this if you don't know what you don't know. And another thing that can really help if you have that possibility is to find people who can either mentor you or give you tips in any kinds of ways. So for like, it's of course it's now the COVID time, but there's a lot of meetups and conferences where you can go. Like most of the meetups are all free, and conferences usually cost money, but not all of them. And sometimes there are tickets for people who are beginners or who have no experience. And that's another really good way to find people. Even today, when there are no meetups, a lot of meetups will still have a mailing list, and you can ask people, and maybe you can get an email contact with somebody, or a chat contact, or maybe just meet one person at a coffee shop or wherever. I think that's also a really good strategy. Or see if you can find a job somewhere where you're basically a beginner. But yeah, for me, it was just always this kind of wanting to explore and wanting to make something. And then, yeah, you have to be careful because you can get down a rabbit hole. Like I wanted to build this app for running routes. Like we have all these marked trails here, and I wanted to just, I had all this GPS data, and then somebody asked me, yeah, can you just make like that I click on this one part of the route and I click on a different part and it has to navigate me there. So I had to implement a lot of computational geometry stuff. I thought it would be not super hard, but I ended up like doing a really deep dive into all these algorithms. Ultimately, like the code I wrote was pretty simple, but I had to spend a lot of time finding the right algorithm and finding the right implementation and all of that. But I learned so much along the way. So yeah, I also really enjoyed that. But I guess it's different for everybody. This is what sort of works for me, but other people just like reading open source code or reading a lot of books first. So yeah, it's sort of, yeah, the first tip would be to figure out how you learn best yourself and then just apply it.
Right.
You talked about that a lot of blogs and mailing lists, and it's really a huge amount of information in the internet, and how not to lost in it. Maybe you can name some mailing lists that are good, the best way to be up to date in this like very dynamic world. Because some resources are really not the best, like messy or
Yeah,
It's
tough. I don't really know. There's a lot of good stuff out there, but also, yeah, like you say, a lot of bad stuff. I noticed in the recent years there have been more blogs who are basically trying to get clicks. Also, I've noticed with some blogs that there's like consistent bad advice or not very good advice. I don't really know like how to give a good answer to that question. I think Yeah, I think it's just with everything you see on the internet, you have to think critically yourself. Like that's the only way. But even then, I mean, who has the time to think critically about everything? I would say ask friends or ask people you know what they think is good. Um, and if you ask like 10 people, that's always going to be a lot better than the advice that I can give you, for example. Um, and yeah, I don't know. No, it's hard to say. Like even like on Stack Overflow, there's so much bad stuff on there, but there's also so many good tips on there. Um, and yeah, it's a tough question to answer. Sorry.
Right. We have one more question, and that won't be too technical. Not technical at all, actually. We know that you run, that you run marathons.
Yes.
Any hints for those who are like trying to get into that? I mean,
Yeah. Well, if you're starting as a runner, I know a lot of people who want to start running, and they ask me sometimes, like, "Yeah, what training schedule do I need to follow? What shoes do I need to buy?" And I think these things become important if you want to be serious about running. But for people who want to start running, I think there are two super important things. The first one is to have fun running, and the second part is to not overdo it. And these are they're very related, because a lot of people think like, well, like everybody runs marathons these days, so like I can run a 5K, for example, like that should be easy. And and they start just running for half an hour or maybe an hour or maybe even 20 minutes. And if you're new to running, that's could be super dangerous. It depends on your body, on your body type, on your age, on your experience with sports. Like there are people who run a half marathon out of nothing, and other people who struggle to run even for 30 seconds or 20 seconds. So the thing I always recommend for people who are absolutely like getting started is just find somebody to run with and run little, like run like, I don't know, like do 40 minutes and do 10 times 10 seconds at the beginning or 20 seconds, and the rest you walk. And just so that you don't overdo it, so that you feel afterwards like it was nice and you didn't hate it. Because if you hate it, you're not going to do it again. And the only thing you can get better at running is by doing lots of it. And the only way to do lots of it is to build it up really slowly. You have to run a little bit, and then sort of your muscles get damaged because of that. Then you have to recover, and your muscles grow, and then you can try again. And it's not just the muscles, of course, also the aerobic system and all of that. But you have to make sure that you want to do it again and again and again and again. And at some point, after like maybe half a year, or maybe for some people it's a few weeks, or maybe it's like 2 years, but at some point you'll notice like I'm much fitter and everything is easier. And I run a lot these days, and I noticed that this trend keeps on going. Like the more you run, the fitter you feel, and the easier the rest of life is. Like it's sometimes it's very hard, like if you go out for a race and you're super tired, or you have like this super intense training session and you come home super tired. But sort of in the long run, you get really I think it has a lot of benefits. And it's not for everybody. Like some people keep trying and they do everything right, but they just don't enjoy it. And I would recommend to find a different sport. Like there's so many cool things you can do, whether that's simple stuff like running, biking, weightlifting, but other people like more dynamic stuff, or like complicated sports or team sports. Yeah. And if you're a runner and you want to get better, what worked for me is just running more. I sort of discovered that for myself only a few years ago. I didn't really know it was an option to run a lot. I always thought like, well, you can run like 3 times a week and maybe 4 times, but that's you cannot really do more because you get injured. And it turned out you can run a lot more if you want to, and if you slowly build it up. And that's been a really big source of pleasure for me, like just getting better and better at it. And it's really this thing where I can basically only compete against myself. Like I will never be anywhere close to like a good runner, like really competitive or anything. Even if I would take all the time off and like have all the money and time to train and all the supplies you need, I would never even come close to probably even the being competitive in the women's field. So for me, it's just this thing that I do for myself, and I can try to get, improve myself just a little bit, and I really enjoy this sort of, just like with writing a book, there's this really long, slow process of getting better or writing that book, and it just takes ages. But then once you do run the marathon, or once you do finish the book, it's also super rewarding. But the most of the fun is actually in the process. It's not the running the race itself or finishing the book. It's actually writing the book and training for the race. Like for me, I like getting up in the morning, having that goal, and like slowly working towards this sort of artificial goal that I set myself. Yeah.
Nice. Well, yeah, thank you very much. That was inspiring, and I hope we will not be just the developers. Some people will be runners too. And
runners,
yeah. Thank you very much for coming. This was the really interesting episode, and I hope the viewers and listeners were happy too. Have a good day. We will be waiting for your next Swift Talks, and we'll be watching that.
Thank you.
See you.
Thank
Bye.
you for sharing your thoughts. See you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.